kick things off, thanks for your patience and for turning up in this weather. But we'll just kick off with some introductions and get going. But Nazanin, introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here. My name is Nazanin Noroozi. I'm a visual artist, I'm a painter, printmaker. I also make, hand-made films. My practice is like a combination of so many different mediums and techniques over the years. I've worked a lot with archives, mostly, either personal things or found footages, images that I find on like various, social media platforms. And today I think we're going to be looking at 3 of my recent films, which is fairly new to me filmmaking. I call them handmade films because they're like stop motion-ish. And Pippa and I, we're going to talk about them. That would be it.
My name's Pippa Mott, for those of you who I haven't met, and I know we've got some people attending via the internet in some format. Hello. My practice, I suppose I think there's some threads of commonality in the approaches that we take, or the concepts that we're investigating. So I'm a curator who most of my work has been within the context of Tasmania, where I was working for the last 8 years at the Museum of Old and New Art. The Museum of Old and New Art is a private museum. It's subterranean kind of, it's described as a subversive adult Disneyland, and that label stuck when someone labeled it that very early on in the piece, but it's a private museum with a collection of about 2,500 objects that investigate ideas of sex and death, but things that are the projects of most interest to me have really been in the setting of our festivals. So I guess some of the projects that will relate a little bit with the ideas that we'll be talking about today were projects that I did in 2021, kind of off the back of the extraordinarily dramatic, tragic fires that raged through Australia that really drove to the forefront of everyone's thinking the catastrophe that we're facing in Australia and around the world with climate. So some of the projects that I delivered in 2021 really looked at, I guess, climate anxiety and this kind of sense of creeping dread, but also kind of zooming out from anthropocentric thinking, trying to think about big picture, geology, deep time. So those are some of the projects that I delivered in 2021 before moving here in August. So up on the screen is a project I did with Lucy Bleach. She's a Tasmanian artist. We froze 7 blocks of ice with minerals collected from around Tasmania. We suspended them from the ceiling of this abandoned mid-century garage, and we allowed them to kind of melt throughout the festival period. I created a soundscape, an instrumentalist, Althea Kuhn. She interacted with it, and it was open 24 hours a day for people to kind of witness this slow but accelerating melt. And it was a very meditative space, even though we were looking at climate change, obviously. It was really quite a beautiful experience, and it kind of allowed some reflection. So that was a project I really enjoyed, despite kind of dealing with some heavier themes. Another project, the same festival that I delivered, was a project called Till It's Gone, which was a group show in an abandoned car museum. That the starting point was another Tasmanian artist, Eloise Kirk, did a project based off her time spent in New Zealand. She did a residency where she visited White Island 2 days before it erupted in like a pretty major event, and she actually captured these photographs of the island like literally kind of bubbling with like volcanic activity, and also captured some of the wreckage from previous explosions. So that was the starting point for a series of sculptures and multimedia kind of paintings, collages that we installed in this car museum alongside Kai Vyshakovsky and Tristan Jala, whose work was also kind of dealing with this idea of collapse. This space was going to be demolished 2 days after the festival finished. So we liked that idea of that kind of, I guess, themes of capitalism and relentless development kind of paired with civilization crumbling. So yeah, really happy, cheerful stuff. But then I did another project that was more about, I guess, broadly speaking, it was called Doors of Perception, and I was looking at psychogeography and kind of the importance of place, but also kind of the interior world during lockdown at a point where people were kind of forced into this like extreme domesticity. This is a work by Team Lab. It's called ENSO, called Light, and it's about really infinity, but beginnings and endings and kind of the overlap. It's a really beautiful piece, but this was just one of kind of many works that kind of dealt with interior worlds, and alongside works that dealt with nostalgia for the outside world. So this is about Nazanin today, but I just wanted to kind of give some context for, I guess, some of the themes that we found after having a really great studio visit to, have some overlap. So I'm going to go back to Nazanin. I'm actually going to kick off with her 3 films. This is not one of them, but we'll start with Riptide. And while I set that up, do you want to maybe introduce that?
Sure, yes. Just one thing that I wanted to add was a Q&A. We forgot.
Oh yeah, that's important.
The event is live streamed via Zoom. So
Yes.
For those people who are watching us, feel free to pop your questions within the Zoom link and for you guys.
Yeah, and
love to
in the chat, type away. A facilitator will kind of be your I don't know, your representative when we kick off the Q&A portion of the evening. So yeah, don't hold back. But in the meantime, tell us about Riptide.
All right, so Riptide is my most recent film. It's a 5-minute short handmade film based on Super 8 movies that my father took back in the late 70s, early 80s. So I come from a painting background. As I mentioned, I work a lot in archives and found images. So because I work with these, snapshots, images of family albums, etc., I always thought like making film makes sense, but I never knew how to do it. And because there's a narrative aspect to my work, I thought like, okay, I really need to start making moving images. When I found these Super 8s, I was like so fascinated with them and I was obsessed with them. So I started playing with them and making these films. So Riptide, what you're gonna see, the 3 films, Riptide is the most recent one, then it's Purl, and then Elite's 1984. They're all based on those Super 8s. It's not a trilogy, but they all kind of relate to one another. There are, you're gonna see found images of glacier melts and, computer graphics and early computer games, etc., which we will talk in detail, I guess, later about it. And I guess we can start.
Okay, so that was Riptide. Fantastic film. If you're happy to move on to the next work.
I think that would be best if we watch
all right,
all three,
let's keep
and
going.
then
For sure.
then we can.
Okay, so Elite 1984.
Oh, we're doing Elite, or are we doing?
Oh, we're
Doesn't
doing
matter.
Purl. No, we're doing Purl. We're doing Purl. You're right.
So we're going like, from the latest to the oldest. Purl was made before this. It's much shorter. I made it in 2019. Same story, it deals with ideas of like longing and displacement and instability. And one of the recurring themes is images of floods and that comes across.
Mhm. Okay, and moving on to, I guess, the first handmade film of yours, and that's Elite 1984.
Yeah, so Elite was the first moving image film thing that I ever made. I feel like it's, in a way, it's the most personal work. I feel it's very close to me. I still get very emotional when I look at it for a number of reasons, especially because, there are images or footages of my mom dancing that I have not seen in 7 years. But then just a little background about the title of the film is that the images that you'll see, or the computer graphics that you will see, are taken from a computer game named Elite, which was released in 1984. And I made this in 2018 for all of the political reasons and the climate that we sort of were living in these days. It felt like using the word 1984 can add like layers, but that's how the name of the film. Just a tiny disclaimer that the image is a little reddish, more reddish than what it's supposed to be. Sorry, just a little.
Thank you for that, Nazanin. So yeah, to kick things off, like a really basic question. Films are fairly new avenue for you in practice, and I'm curious to know what kind of compelled you to move in this direction, and how you have applied your years of experience and methodology as primarily as a printmaker.
Right. Well, as I just mentioned, I feel like, I felt like my work has always dealt with the idea of, narratives and broken narratives mainly. And I felt like it would be easier for me to tell these broken stories that I'm interested in if I can find a way to have like moving images. But I wasn't really sure how to do it. When I was in my grad school, people would come to me and say, well, hey, what do you think we should make like video art? And I was like, well, but I'm a painter. And, I come from a painting background, so I have a lot of biases, I feel like, about being a painter. If you ask me still, wake me in the middle of the night and be like, okay, so what kind of artist are you? I would still say I'm a painter, although, I don't make paintings anymore. But really finding those Super 8s were like, I think the triggering moments that I needed to do it. And the way it happened, which I actually love talking about it, was that when I found those Super 8s, I didn't know exactly what was in them or what were they. There are these tiny, tiny little, things, rolls of film. So I brought them back, and I went to the store here at B&H, and I digitized them so that I could see actually like what's inside. And the process of making these films happened in a way that I started, I have these films digitized, and then I take screenshots or still frames of every couple of seconds. I print them out with a regular, normal home printer, and then I start painting on every single frame. So in the very beginning, I was like, okay, I'm going to start like playing with these images and see what I can do. And that's how it started. I started painting on every single frame. And the way they're done are really, really primitive. I know that there are like probably millions of faster, easier ways to make, films. So that's why they're like, a stop motion, but not quite. So I painted every single frame, and then I either scan them or, take a picture of them and set them up together and or I have an app on my phone that I have used for a very long time. I actually love it. And that's how, how it started. I feel like once I had my, once I started the first frames of Elite's 1984, I was like, okay, this is the direction for me. And that's how it went. There were so many things. Now looking at, Elite's 1984, I feel like, oh my God, there's so many technical problems that, that are like off registered, and the frame per second is not like great. But that's how I do. I love making hundreds of little paintings. That's technically how I make these films, and that's why I still see them as, moving images and not necessarily films. I call them handmade films. I mean, I didn't come up with the term. There's a term called handmade cinema, which I just recently became familiar with, and I think it really explains, or like my work really falls into that category. In a way.
Yeah. Detouring a little bit from our plan, we discussed. I mean, one thing I would love to know more about is the sound aspect, the music, because it's incredibly atmospheric. It's like, I mean, what we heard through, I guess, Riptide particularly, it's kind of like really aspirational. It's sci-fi. It's a little bit military when you've got those kind of things that sound like a submarine. I mean, but then, seeing that that's actually, it's a composer, it's not a kind of a medley that it's not a composition on your end. How do you approach the kind of, locating and kind of placing music within your videos?
Right. Sound is definitely new to me. It's something that I was like so scared of when I started making these films. I didn't know, like for the first time I had to like deal with a whole other layer. I was a visual artist, two-dimensional person for the longest time. And it's like, oh my God, so there's like another aspect that I have to actively think about and like use it for my, strength. So I play a lot with like sound effects, but especially with the Riptide, the music is, as I was thinking about the 80s, so these computer games, the graphic elements that you see come and go, they're all taken from the early computer games that they were made and created in the 80s. The Super 8s were done in the 80s. So it kind of, I was like, researching, thinking about the 80s in a very active, conscious way. And I got a little more familiar with the music of the 80s, which is very electronic, all synthesizers, I don't know, like instruments in a way.
Blade Runner, actually.
Exactly, exactly.
That's just, yeah,
absolutely. So the music that I chose for the Riptide is composed by Joel Feigerman, who's a really well-known French composer, one of the pioneers of electronic music. He made that piece, Flowers Love, for a really popular documentary series that was about nature and plants and flowers at a time. And it was extremely popular. It aired in 40-something countries in the world. It's, sublime, it's scary, it has all of these, nuances. Ironically, it is the intro of one of the most popular state TV programs in Iran when I was growing up. So again, 80s were it was an odd time for us. It was the war years, the revolution happened in 79, so we're kind of isolated. And there were a few things for people to entertain themselves with and watch. And there was this one TV program that was extremely popular. And that music piece was on the intro of it. I am very conscious and a little peculiar about dealing with ideas of nostalgia. And melancholia, but if I tell you that the reason I chose Flowers Love was mainly because of its atmospheric kind of effects, and the last thing that I thought about was the fact that, oh my God, this for a certain group of Iranian people means something completely different. So that was, of course, something that I considered, but it wasn't the main.
It wasn't the driving factor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, you have all these, the Riptide or the bings, which is the sound of sonar, which is, submarines use to, send each other signals. So there are all these things that come and go. In Elite's 1984, there's also another, piece of music composed by an Iranian composer that I grew up listening to when I was a kid, but it's really in the background. So as I'm thinking about, the ideas of longing and stability and this and that, I also like to play with the sound aspect of it to get people or push people into that zone that that I like to be in.
Yeah, and I guess that brings me to my next question in kind of the way that your work deals with the mechanics of nostalgia and memory and kind of manipulates the viewer in a sense, because I think Super 8, in terms of just the texture that it carries, just that particular textural quality, and then overlaid with these computer graphics from the games from the 80s. I mean, watching these films today kind of got me thinking, was why am I feeling nostalgic for something that was not part of my youth? I was born in 1990. These are not my games. This is not my medium. But I think popular culture has primed us to respond to these mediums. And in that sense, you're kind of concocting a really unique scenario here. And I just want to know more about that kind of subtle manipulation that you're performing, throughout these films.
Well, I mean, there's so many things that can be said about it. I guess for me, what is very interesting dealing when I deal with archives is that, I always say this as an example, that when you go to a friend's house and you look at their family albums, you don't know the story. You don't know who's who. You don't know who's the grandmother, who's the aunt, who's the cousin, and you start making up these stories in your head. You start making these connections, although they're not your people, right? But you start making these things in your head. So I'm really interested in that. I'm interested in having like broken narratives, throwing people out there in this kind of created universes that, you know, there's a parallel universe, there's something going on. You know that there may be some kind of a relation between them, but you don't know exactly what is going on. And that's, I feel like, how I like to play with the idea of memory, of like how I, as an artist, take archives as something that is typically sterile and clinical and, you know, dealt with as facts. Take it and make it my own and create something that is somewhat, you know, fictional and partially factual at the same time. As in like, you know, Super Ace, I'm so glad that you mentioned the visual quality or the pictorial quality of it, because they have like such specific color coding to them that I'm so drawn into them. And then as I was thinking about the 80s and the computer games, I'm not a gamer. I've never played any of these games. There are some of them that I was a little familiar with, but maybe my approach to them is a little elitist as well, because I was never a gamer. But there's something about these computer games that is so raw and primitive. You know, they're very different from what we know today of computer games. Everything is pixelated. Everything is very geometric, right? Ironically, they are the very first-person shooting games as well. So, you know, in the mid-80s, early 90s, it was the first time for human beings to be able to, like, you know, sit in their living room and shoot.
Simulate violence.
Well, you know, well, they've always assimilated violence in so many ways, but, like, you know, through digital platforms, like, you know, look at things and shoot at things. And I find juxtaposition of, you know, super sentimental, kind of romantic Super Ace with these kind of raw, barbaric, early computer games together really interesting. And that's what I try to, like, you know, play with.
Yeah, and I mean, dualisms and these kind of dichotomies, like charge your videos, your work, your body of work entirely, you know, has kind of like sentimentality and nostalgia is kind of offset by like extreme kind of like catastrophe and violence, and you kind of navigate this. You have a way of like synthesizing that into in a very interesting way. But I mean, thinking more about your approach to kind of working with archives and kind of found footage. So you've got the Super 8 that is actually found footage in the sense that it's personal, it's, you know, from your family. But the way you kind of incorporate, you know, like YouTube videos, we talked about it today, you know, kind of pulling from Instagram, pulling from YouTube, like news platforms.
Right.
And there's something kind of archaeological in your approach to kind of archives. You're kind of digging down and retrieving things, but then at the same time, you kind of look at your material approach that kind of like very intentionally kind of obscures things and kind of like adds layers. So it's kind of this digging down, this retrieval, this kind of bringing things to light, but then it's kind of adding new layers of complexity. And the artist's hand is always very present within these interventions. I think Purl, you know, particularly to me, really kind of spoke to me about your methodology, and I was like,
yeah, because the images or the footage of the, you know, the flood and everything. So they're all fact. Nothing is mine in a way. And what I do is I usually, you know, I either film it again with my iPhone, with my, you know, my phone or whatever, or like I get really close that it gets pixelated, it gets distorted. So for me, just looking at found material is never enough. I really feel like, again, it's probably my painting bias of thinking like, okay, you got to do something to it to make it into something. But, you know, it's like, I always like to add these layers, obscure it, take it back and forth. I am truly interested in like creating some kind of chaotic universe that doesn't make sense. Right. Yeah. And I'm somewhat of a maximalist as well. So I can, a lot of times I feel like, especially with printmaking, I do layers on top of layers on top of layers, and I add this and that until the work is like completely gone. And it's like, I feel like you need to know when to stop, right? Which is one of the hardest things that I think any artist needs to learn. Same as with the found footage and archive. Like, you know, I play with them as much as I can. And it would be, I really enjoy looking at other people's work, dealing with archives and presenting them like as factual things, because I understand that, just by the way you rearrange things, you give them new meanings. That I totally get. But for my own practice, I feel like this is not enough. And I want them to be painterly. I want them to be handmade. I want them to be manipulated and visibly manipulated.
Yeah, and I think like thinking about memory and archives, like I mean, I did a show a couple of years ago at Mona that was working with two cognitive scientists investigating kind of the way we think about thinking, or the way we assume the brain works, and the way that we think memory performs as this kind of discrete units of compartmentalized, fact that you can kind of retrieve at will, and that are unchangeable. When really it's such a malleable and very misunderstood process, and I think that archives are such an interesting human impulse to kind of create this structure around our faulty memories, and I like the way you kind of embrace that in your work and kind of expose it but amplify it as well. I think that's very cool. But the next question is so obviously like bonded over disaster and climate anxiety. Yes. Yay. But embedded with Riptide is this kind of sense of catastrophe and disaster. So it's kind of bookended by, on either end you've got this found footage of missiles, and then throughout the work you've got meteors, and you've got melting ice caps. You've got this kind of disasters happening on very different scales, human, kind of cosmic. You've got deep time. You've got very rapid, kind of violent kind of moments, affecting humanity and affecting broader ecosystems. But I am interested about your use of asteroids and how these kind of perform as a motive, because they do reoccur also throughout the prints. And also the icebergs, which, speaking of memory, right before our chat this evening, I asked Nazanin, I was like, can you remind me, when did you do your artist residency in the Arctic Circle? When did you gather all this amazing imagery? She's like, I never went. And I'm like,
never been to the Arctic.
So I am guilty of totally inventing memories and filling gaps, and
which is great.
And I did that today. Yeah. So you didn't go to the Arctic.
I did not go to the Arctic, but I don't think I'd be happy going anywhere that cold, and I would not like to. If you know me at all, you know that anything below 50 for me.
Yeah. So we'll stick to the found footage. But returning to that, I'd like to know more about your use of these kind of moments of disaster.
Sure. Just wanted to say that maybe we can. Do you think we can look at some of those prints with the asteroids?
I forget I have a presentation in front of me.
No, don't worry about that.
Here we go.
Okay, so that's some of these guys. To be 100% honest, I don't know where they came from. I have a feeling that so just to get into the technical aspects of it. This is like a cyanotype, which is a 19th century kind of photo technique, mostly used for craft and stuff, but I really like it. Of a found image of a glacier melt with these asteroids, and there are screen prints on top of it. There are 3 of these guys. They're all called the meeting number 1, number 2, number 3, and there's a layer of watercolor on top of it, so technically it's not an edition's work. But so I feel like as I was working with the films, and especially with Purl, there are images or elements of the Star Wars game, and there are these stones, these rocks in the sky that are being shot with tanks and stuff. I feel like that was maybe the beginning for me to become interested in the idea of these flying objects around us. But I'm not sure exactly where and how they came into my work. What I know about them is that I'm very much interested in their shape, their aesthetics. They're these rocky potato thingies that are like, you don't know exactly what they are. Is this a potato or is this a rock? And they're like, orbiting around the Earth.
And
they make
your films, like they quite literally like you feel like they're encircling you.
Exactly, because they're around us, and you feel like they may hit us at any minute, which is fact, right? So for me, these asteroids combined with the glacier melts, they started as like ways for me to explain or convey these ideas of like heaviness and stability, and the sense of despair that I felt for a very long time in my personal life, and and like how the world is going on. But I also feel like they work really well within the context that I'm thinking about. So like in terms of global warming or things that are like very present, they weren't in my active conscious thinking when I started working on these guys, but now I'm actually a little more aware, and I like to play with them. There's something about the glacier melts, especially when you look at the numerous footages and films on YouTube, social media. There's something really unbelievably sublime and beautiful about it. These giant icebergs, melting right in front of your eyes, which you can see in the Riptide, it's like falling down, and you feel like, oh my God, I'm witnessing this historic moment, which is happening all the time, right? But it's also very tragic. And this is something that I like to play with. I feel like with the personal images and the archives and Super 8, it's the same thing. It's this ordinary moment in a way. There's something that all of us have experienced. Someone bringing the cake, birthdays, kids, school choirs, girls singing, etc. These are the ordinary moments of life, but there's something very heroic about them. Same with the glacier melts and the asteroids, that there are like these really sublime moments, but there's something mundane about them as well, because it's happening.
It's literally they're zooming past us, like,
right? So yeah, for me, it's like, they, especially the asteroids and the meteors are like, for me, there are the symbols, or the ways I can talk about how everything can be taken away in a quick second.
Yeah,
which is I feel like it's one of the recurrent themes of my work.
It's kind of to me like counter empathy, because like we're very like we clearly have a tragedy unfolding in terms of the climate crisis. Like we have the evidence is there, it's embedded in your work, but then when you kind of think of the meteor, the asteroid wipes us all out, it kind of renders us, right. And now like it renders our planetary struggles kind of minute.
Right.
Yes. Right. So moving from this image, which actually does have a prison in it that we're going to talk about next, and sorry, there's another wonderful Polaroid image, and this was actually an image that I pulled from the website. Right. I just wanted to show that as an example of how you're kind of having this zoom in, zoom out of different scales of tragedy.
Right.
So this is the kind of darkness of a plane crash.
Right. So this is going to be, these are my studies and sketches for the upcoming project that I've been delaying for, God, it was that long. But yeah, so I've been really obsessed with the beginning and the end of the Riptide. Starts with this found, video of the downing of the Ukrainian airplane, which happened 2 years ago. So long story short, there was this, passenger airplane flying from Iran to Canada that the Iranian government shot by mistake. And there's this. It was a national tragedy, but I've been really obsessed with it in many ways, not only because of how it relates to me personally as an artist living here, but also as how elusive and unstable everything is. And I've been working on, these ideas and these sketches of, the downed airplane. Everything that I have been working on is actually from the found images, or, the photographs that the news agencies had from that specific airplane. But what I did with the Riptide, the beginning and the end, what I liked about that specific film was that you don't know exactly what is going on. And unless you don't know the backstory, you may just think, oh my God, what just happened? Was that an explosion? Was that a UFO? What is going on? And I like concealing that. I thought actively about like whether I want to reveal it at some point in the film to talk more about like what was the thing that you saw. But I thought like, this kind of mysterious beginning and the end gives some kind of a, framework into like the idea of tragedy.
I felt it bookended or encapsulated. It brought back, like you kind of start with the human on the ground, tragedy, you zoom out. You zoom back in. I thought that worked very effectively. Zooming forward again, more amazing facial imagery. Now the prism. So there's this kind of I just gave it away. there's this kind of irregular prism that kind of floats around in the videos and appears in a lot of your works on paper as well. And when I was really curious about it, when I met you and watched your videos, and I saw this image popping up, and you revealed that it was from an engraving Melencolia by Durer, which is an incredible image. It's at the Met, not on good at the moment, but if you want to check it out online, they have everything in super high res, so you can check it out. And I think at the time you might have described it as something like a philosopher's stone. It's a very ambiguous component of this image, but it forms this kind of thread of commonality across your work, and I'd love to know what it means to you.
I don't know, it means a lot of things. This print is, Durer is this master printmaker, engraver. He's one of the most amazing artists that I, ever know. I really like the idea of artists talking to artists, having conversations with other artists from various periods of history. And many successful people or people that I really admire have done it actively. Picasso, like Hockney talked to Picasso talked to Baroque, and Matisse, etc. So this Melancholia, as I was thinking about ideas of longing and displacement, which were very present in my work, I got to study this work a little more, which is called Melancholia. It was made in early 16th century, I think 1504, 1505, something like that.
1514, 14.
It's a mysterious thing. No one really knows exactly what the work is about. Melancholia is one of the cardinal humors. It's one of the temperaments, right? And at the time, it was considered really undesirable of all the, 4 temperaments that one could have. It was known that, someone who has melancholia is more prone to become insane. It did associate with artists, and, but in a way, this work is said to be, about the existential questions that the artist had at the time. This solid there are so many theories about it, like what it is. It's a cube, it, falls on every angle, every side. But I find it super interesting in terms of its shape. And, as I'm thinking about Melancholia, and I'm very specific about how I like to, when I like to talk about my work, I like to talk about the idea of melancholy rather than nostalgia, because melancholy is more of an existential, philosophical problem, whereas nostalgia is kind of sentimental and romantic and very sweet and soft. But melancholy is dealing with this ideas of, time and memory and this and that in a way that is bigger than just your personal, feelings. So that's how this guy came into my work, and I've been playing with it ever since. What can I say? I like it. It's just, it comes and goes.
So zooming forward, and I'm also going to check it tonight because we've got to field some questions from you lot as well. But in terms of your use of kind of consistent imagery and motifs that appear across your work, there was another image that drew my interest, and that was Mount Valbonne in Iran. And so I did cursory research and can understand that it is not a dormant volcano. It's not sitting there kind of as an unthreatening presence. The word is a stratovolcano, potentially active stratovolcano. So, and to me, it reminded me which film, Elite.
It's an Elite, right? Yeah.
So in Elite 1984, it's got quite a sinister presence.
Right.
I felt, and I just wondered if it's kind of potentially kind of dangerous or threatening status is maybe kind of something to do with the way that you're presenting it.
Well, what I have tried to do with all the 3 films is that I like to throw out these geographical codes.
Mm-hmm.
So in Elite, you have Mount Saint-Laurent, which is the peak of the mountain range outwards, which is right by Tehran where I grew up. This is actually another angle of it. So this is technically, you see those little houses there, this is technically where I grew up. Mm-hmm. And you go there, it's easy to get to that one from here. You can see the entire city, right? So Tehran is surrounded by Alborz range, and especially you can see Mount Saint-Laurent wherever you are in the city. So in Elite 1984, I have that. In Purl, the floods that you see is images of the Caspian Sea, mm-hmm. which is in the northern part of the country, and in the Riptide, you have the Ukrainian airplane down in it. So there are all these, little things that I put there, although I don't necessarily talk about them, so that you can, if you want, you can connect to where specifically these images are coming from. Mm-hmm. For again, same time, Mount Saint-Laurent has specific symbolism in Persian mythology. It's where the evil 2-headed dragon is chained for eternity, and a lot of our epic stories are around that thing. So for me, it's a symbol of resistance. There are so many magnificent, prose, contemporary, and classic, and literature about how beautiful this thing is. So for me, it's it's there. But at the same time, yes, it is a symbol of resistance, but it can also be extremely destructive, and it can erupt any minute. Again, just like the asteroids. Exactly. Right. So one thing that you grow up thinking about, if you want to think deeply, that okay, this can act as a symbol for this nation or for this contemporary existence of us, can also destroy us at any minute. It's something that I like to play around. Yeah. But as I said, I'm really interested in the ideas of forces of nature, because I think it can play really well with these sweet Super 8 kind of family moments.
Yeah, and there's that dualism again.
Right, exactly.
Threatening, kind of homely, family, fatalism are all kind of
it's also about ideas of home that never really materialize. So it's also a question of where exactly is home, and are these things that we are looking at that are these sweet moments, or these natural disasters, where is there anywhere that we can call home, which gets me back to the ideas of questions of longing and displacement, and we're in a constant state of displacement. Mm-hmm. And I guess you can see it with these elements of nature as well.
Yeah. I've included a couple of images here of an artist book that you actually produced. It was, I think, actually titled.
Yes.
Again, I'm deviating from our plan, but you showed me a slide that I'm not sure if it was this exact one, but you showed me, it was a kind of a concertina kind of work.
Right. Oh, the one that the one I showed you was the In the Woods book, which was a accordion book that would come out. And I made that with a Diana camera, which is a toy camera from the 60s, and everything is made from plastic, even the lens.
Yeah.
So the images were right. So they were blurry, and that one was mostly about the idea of like failure. I really wanted to embrace, I'm not a photographer, although I work with photographs all the time, I'm the worst photographer in the whole world. I swear to God, there's not one image or frame that I can like compose. So I was like, okay, I am going to embrace this idea. I have this toy camera in my hand from the 60s. I have this black and white darkroom, and I'm going to try and see how I can, you know, play with the idea of failure and bad images. I wish I could.
Yeah, we don't have images of that, but I guess I was curious about your practice that you know incorporates artist books, and I didn't get to see this one, but I saw some of the Cyanotypes in the studio. Okay, well, thank you.